Can your kids retire only off of the S&P 500? Before we get started, if you're new to our channel is all about wealth, money, and giving yourself permission to be wealthy. Now, one thing to note is every week my wife and I will post 3 videos, one that she selects for herself, one that I select, a material that I want to cover, and the third video is typically one that we do together on information that we feel like couples should be sharing about money, wealth, and giving themselves permission to be wealthy. So in this video, what we're going to be doing is discussing if your children can retire off VOO or the S&P 500. Now, before we jump into that material, make sure you go down and hit the like button if you do enjoy this material that we cover every week, and also subscribe to the channel. We do really like making sure that we share as much information we can about money, building wealth, and giving yourself permission to be wealthy. So if you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, make sure you subscribe, and now let's jump into the material. What we're going to do is start off the video with a study that was done in 2021 by Schwab. Essentially what it said was the average worker now believes that they need $1.9 million in order to be able to retire. Now that may seem like a lot of money, especially for you, depending if you're a millennial like me. I'm 38 and my wife is as well, and going, can we get to that point? Well, let's think about it a little bit differently. We're building this video specifically and creating this video for our children and helping them be able to retire. So if we start sooner, which you'll understand later on in the video, we'll give you tips and tricks on how to do that. But if we start sooner, maybe it's much easier for our children to become multimillionaires than it is for us. That doesn't mean we can't become that. We just want to make sure that we're thinking about our kids as we go ahead and start planning for financial futures. So one thing I want to make clear is whenever I'm saying S&P 500 and VOO, they are synonymous. The VOO essentially tracks the S&P 500. So if you hear me say S&P 500 and you hear me say VOO, they are essentially the same thing. The other thing to note is that VOO is actually an ETF, so it's an exchange traded fund. And so it's easier to get into. So whenever people are saying, hey, how do I get started investing? I don't want to put $3,000 up front investing in one of these other funds that cost that much to get started. An ETF is a good way to get started. So hopefully that helps you overcome some of those ideas that you have about getting started in investing. So VOO, or the S&P 500, is basically an index that tracks the largest companies in the United States. So whenever we're talking about this, the thing to keep in mind is we're tracking the largest companies that are in the United States, so the best performing companies that are out there. So at first when people talk about stocks, I know I used to get confused and I used to be like, okay, what do they mean by the top 500 companies? Well, I want you to think about the largest companies you can think of. The ones that come to mind for me are Apple, Tesla, Google, Amazon, Home Depot. Places that you actually go to and you might visit are some of the largest companies out there, Disney. And so these companies are the top 500 companies that are out there. So think about everyday brands. You can look them up and see if they are in the S&P 500. So the interesting thing about the S&P 500, for those of you who are thinking about using VOO to invest for your kids, is since the 1920s, the index that tracks the S&P 500 has seen massive gains. We'll talk about gains roughly around 10% since 1920. Now the thing to keep in mind is that's the average number. That doesn't mean that every year it's going to be 10%. Some years it'll be 20+% like it was in 2021. Now in 2022, it may be down. So it's going to fluctuate, but over time, the average since 1920 has been 10%. So as we're thinking about our kids, one thing to note is depending on your kid's age, of course, right? So our kids are the age of 2 and 9 months. So what we want to look at is these numbers since 1975. So that's the number I want you to keep in your mind, because you'll probably be a millennial if this number makes sense to you. So 1975, or since 1975, over the course of 20-year periods. So let's say we take any 20-year period since 1975, the S&P 500 has always had positive gains. So as you look at your child, we're investing for the long term, right? Or if you're looking at this video for yourself, we're investing for the long term. So since 1975, every 20 years, no matter where you invested, you were sitting at positive gains. So as we talk about this, what does that mean to you? Well, the thing that you want to keep in mind is you want to make sure that you're thinking about long term. You're not thinking about short term. Whenever we're investing for our kids, we're not thinking about, oh, tomorrow if I put $10,000 in, it's going to turn into, another $1,000 or whatever the case is. No, we're looking at the long term. As we invest for years and years and decades to come, maybe they hit 20 or 30 and they have $100,000 in there. Every year, they should be seeing roughly, on average, about $10,000 return. Think about if your parents had done that for you. So make sure whenever you look at the stock market and you look at the S&P 500 or VOO, make sure that you're zooming out, because that's going to allow you to actually see what is happening with the stock market versus looking at every single day. You zoom out, you'll see that everything has gone up and to the right for years and years now. Okay, so now we know the history of the S&P 500. We know that every 20 years, if you invested in any point in 20-year segment of time after 1975, then you had positive returns. Well, now let's go and say, what if that was the only thing we're investing in? Would our kids be able to retire only investing specifically on the S&P 500 or in VOO specifically? And if so, if that were to be the case, is that something that you want to do as a plan for yourself or for your kids? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at, I used to be a school teacher, and if I were to have started investing, let's say whenever I was having my first child 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and I said I was making about $50,000 as a school teacher, well, I would be investing about 10% of my income into the S&P 500, or roughly $417. Will that be enough to help my kids retire in the future? Now, keep in mind, this money that we're talking about is $417 per month. So if you're a school teacher watching this and you have kids and maybe you want to teach them about this, this is something you want to do more research on. Or if you're a parent, you want to go break these numbers out for your kid and investing $417 per month into the S&P 500 or VOO. Okay, so for the sake of the video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to say, okay, here are our kids, here's how much money I make, here's how much I can dedicate. I make $50,000 a year. I have $417 that I can allocate to my child's investing, and then I'm going to go 10% of that is going to be what I invest every single month, and I'm anticipating having 10% gains annually on this particular money. Okay, so only after 10 years of investing, let's take a look at how much money we'd actually have. Well, we're roughly going to have about $85,420. So you made almost double what you've invested in within a 10-year period. So I hope this is getting you excited. We're talking about the long term here, and what if your parents would have done this for you and what you get to do for your kids. So let's say now after 20 years, you've invested $100,000. Okay, you've invested $100,000. That comes out in the actual investment portfolio. When compounding starts taking its effect now, you're looking at $316,000 that you have for your kids in their investment account. If you started early, they're only 20 years old and they have this much money. Imagine what your life would be like if your parents did this for you. Okay, so now after 30 years, what we're looking at is we have $150,000 invested. I want you to go down into the comments and comment what you think that has grown to after this amount of time for your kids. They're 30 years old at this point. Well, the number comes out to $942,000. That's how much your kids will have at the age of 30 by doing nothing except having wonderful parents that took the idea of investing into something like the S&P 500 or VOO. Think about that. I think it's mind-blowing to even consider something like this and know what you're setting your kids up to be and who they'll be financially whenever they're 30 years old and have $942,000, almost $1 million in the bank or their stock portfolio at the age of 30. Okay, so if your mind wasn't blown before, now they're 40 years of age. Maybe they've taken over their own account now and they're putting their own $417 in per month. And at the age of 40, at that point, they will have invested, let's take a look here, $200,000. Their portfolio has grown to $2.637 million. They're 40 years old. I'm 38. I'm thinking, man, if my parents would have done this for me, and then instead of having like a different thing they were investing in and they were doing this, man, how sweet life would be. And so I want you to really dive into these numbers. I want you to go do your own research, of course, but let's start thinking about our kids differently and getting them started early. $2.6 million off of a total of $200,000, or let's break it down more simplified, $417 per month. You start investing for them when they're babies, you get to the age of 18 or 20, they get their own job, and you're like, hey, this is what you need to do. You show them this number, and I guarantee they're gonna be motivated to do this particular thing. It's absolutely mind-blowing when you start thinking about compounding this way. Okay, so I know that this is probably exciting some of you and going, man, what if I did a little bit more? What if we're both school teachers, we're both making $50,000 a year, $100,000? What if we took a different approach and put, let's say, $1,000, so about $500 each to start setting our kids up for the future, and let's take a look at that number and see if that's much greater than the $2.6 million or the $417 per month that you were putting in previously into VOO or the S&P 500. Okay, so now we're investing this $1,000 into VOO or the S&P 500. You and your spouse, or maybe you make enough money to be able to do this and you're investing $1,000 per month. Your total investment after 10 years is gonna be a total of $120,000. That's gonna be worth $204,000 after 10 years. So you can see here the compounding effect of investing is starting to take effect with that 10% return every single year, just building on top of itself. All right, so now let's take a look at 20 years. What happens after 20 years? How much have you invested? Since you were investing every single month, $1,000, you have a total of $240,000 invested for your child in the S&P 500 or VOO, and that has grown to $759,000. If you started early and they're 20 years old, they have $759,000 in the bank because you invested, or let's call it their investment portfolio, because you invested $1,000 per month. Now, after 30 years, you have a total of $360,000 invested for a total investment portfolio worth $2.26 million. I want you to repeat that number to yourself or write it down in the comments or just think about this. $2.26 million after 30 years your child has in their stock portfolio by investing the S&P 500 or VOO. Okay, so now we're gonna get into mind-boggling numbers. So after 40 years, let's say your kid takes over, they have a good job, you train them well, you taught them about financial literacy. They have invested about, at the time of 40 years, about $480,000. That portfolio is now worth $6.324 million. Think about having that in your investment portfolio. And think about being able to take 4% of that every year. You almost have nothing to worry about for the rest of your life. And your kid would be 40 years old and they would be set for life if you teach them about financial literacy and start getting them prepared to really start managing this money the right way. So I think the answer we are all looking for with this video is, can you just put a simple S&P 500 or VOO to work and become retired off of it? And can your children become retired off of investing into the S&P 500 or VOO? I think the answer, as we saw, $6.2 million plus, is yes. The great thing to keep in mind is the S&P 500 does if you watch my wife's other video where she talks about this, I can't remember if it's this side or that side, but if you watch that video, she talks about how the S&P 500 basically rinses itself of companies that are not performing very well. So you have this diversified stock portfolio of 500 plus of the United States' greatest companies, and every year they are making sure they rinse out any bad companies that are not performing very well. So you have this portfolio that is really, really set up to follow these companies that are trying to strive to be the top companies in the world. So one thing I want you to note is, I want you to do your own research, of course. Whenever Stephanie and I are talking in these videos, we want you to have enough information to know what you could do and what the possibilities are. But there are other things that you have to consider. Putting your money into just VOO is not going to be the riskiest thing in the world, but you might be missing out on other companies that are smaller that may have major gains in the future. And I'm not telling you to do one or the other. I'm just telling you there are other things that you could possibly invest in. You still have real estate, you still have crypto if that's something you're interested in, or at least teaching your kids, hey, I'm investing in this for you. These are things that I want you to go do research on as well. And so, yes, we know the answer is you could definitely retire. Your children could retire off of the S&P 500 or investing in a VOO, but you don't want to leave yourself just in one particular thing and not doing enough research to see if there's other possibilities that you can be investing in. Because let's be honest, there's also the international markets that are out there. But if you were to ask me, hey, Joseph, if you were to be talking to your kids about this, how would you speak to them about it? Well, I think Stephanie and I would say, hey, children, these are the top companies in the United States. I think this is a safe place to start. Again, I'm not a financial advisor. Go seek one out if you want that type of information. But if I were talking to my kids, I would say, this is a safe place to start. It's easy to get into, and we don't have to spend a lot of money to get you started. And then we can continue investing. And at the point of the age that you're at where you can start working, then you can take over, or we can at least split what it costs to invest for your future. And I think thinking that way is setting your kids up for a future that you don't currently have, and maybe a position financially that you're not currently in. And if you do get to that point and you can start investing for your kids and teach them to start doing this as well, that's how you really, really start building generational wealth for your children. And a lot of people think you have to have $10,000 a month to do this type of stuff. We're talking $417 per month, and they're going to be almost millionaires within a 20-year time frame. So I really want you to think about that, and really want you to think about the other possibilities that are out there, but I think just getting started is the first step. Well, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I think we've proven that you can retire off VOO and the S&P 500. And if you enjoy our videos and you want to see more videos about money, personal finance, and building wealth, as well as giving yourself permission to be wealthy, make sure you subscribe and check out our other videos here. We'll see you in the next video.